Welcome to my 229th video on my work with OO gauge. In this video I'll be returning to the Dublo Duchess that I picked up at the June Ancaster train show. That model turned out to be fitted with a 2-rail EM gauge chassis with a dead motor, so I ended up fitting the loco and tender bodies to Dublo 3-rail Duchess of Atholl chassis that I had on hand for both loco and tender. The combination wasn't great. The loco body seems to be suffering from Mazak rot, certainly it's badly cracked in the middle, and the loco chassis I used was never a great runner. Poor running was why it was sitting around my work area unused. But still, I decided that I might as well persist with this model, and as such I wanted to rename and renumber it to represent a member of the Coronation class that I didn't already have in Dublo 3-rail. And that's what I'll be doing in this video, along with some further attempts to improve the running of the loco chassis. Here's the model in question, where I'd left it sitting on my Dublo 3-rail tabletop after the initial mating of bodies and chassis. It was running up to a point, although it needed more power than it should have, and it didn't look too bad, although the worst crack in the body was quite noticeable if you look at all closely. I pulled it round to the front of the table so that I could readily take it off the track and get it to the bench. Although I had done some servicing work on this chassis in the past without a great deal of success, I decided to have one more go at trying to improve the running before working on renaming and renumbering the body. So I got the chassis out of the body on the bench. I believe this is actually the very first Duchess of Atholl chassis that I got in the initial Dublo train set that I bought. I took out the brush retainers and the brush springs, undid the magnet nut and removed the magnet and the pole pieces. I unscrewed the top bearing, removed the armature, and used a small, strong magnet on the end of a screwdriver to remove the ball from the lower motor bearing. That's the only way those balls can be got out, in my experience. I had replacement balls on hand now. I bought a bag of 1/16" bearing balls on Amazon quite cheaply, and these seemed to be ideal for the Dublo motor bearings. I put new balls into both top and bottom bearings, along with some moly grease to hold them in place and lubricate. I cleaned the commutator with electrical contact cleaner and used a needle to get carbon out of the grooves of the commutator. Then I reassembled the motor, adjusting the bearings with the new balls. I generally reckon to tighten the top bearing until it binds on the armature and then back it off about half a turn before locking it in place. When new balls have been fitted, you want to tighten the bearing down well at first to bed the new balls all the way down with the grease into the holes, otherwise they'll bed down as the motor runs and leave too much play. I remagnetized the motor in my Dodds magnetizer. I'm glad I got this, as without it I didn't like to remove the magnets from the motors, since they'll lose magnetism when they're removed. But if you've got the remagnetizer, it's no problem. You just put them back in and then remagnetize them. I tried the chassis on the tracks. I didn't really see much improvement from before. I tried detaching the contact for the suppressing capacitor from the chassis as seen here, as I didn't really like the look of that capacitor, and I thought that the chassis might run better without the capacitor connected across. However, this didn't seem to improve the running at all, sadly. I connected the capacitor back up again and gave the chassis a final oiling to the motion and the axles. Unfortunately, none of this did anything much to improve the running a lot. The chassis did run reasonably smoothly, but it needed 90% power on the Gauge Master controller to run at any decent speed. I gave it a good running in to bed the brushes back in, etc., but it didn't improve a lot. I can't think what else I could do to this chassis other than perhaps replacing the armature, if I had a spare, which I don't at the moment. Anyway, I decided to get on with the renaming, and here's the body on the bench ready for that process. Now, a few words about what I had chosen to do with this model. The short version is that I decided to rename it and renumber it as the Duchess of Sutherland, but I think a little bit more explanation than that is worthwhile. The first 10 locomotives of the LMS Coronation class were built in 1937 and 1938 and went into service as seen here with streamlining. The first locomotive of the Coronation class to go into service without streamlining was the Duchess of Buccleuch, which was completed in June 1938. This loco went into service as seen here, with no streamlining, no smoke deflectors, and finished in LMS Crimson livery. 4 more locos were built and went into service like this in the summer of 1938, for a total of 5, all named as Duchesses: Duchess of Buccleuch, Duchess of Atholl, Duchess of Montrose, Duchess of Sutherland, and Duchess of Abercorn. These locos were numbered consecutively from 6230 to 6234. After those locos, another series of Coronation-class engines were built with streamlining, named for cities. Note that all of these engines, whether streamlined or unstreamlined, and whether named for duchesses or cities or whatever, were all considered by the LMS to be members of a single class, since they were essentially mechanically identical. This class was first called the Princess Coronation class, later simplified just to the Coronation class. Referring to some of these locos as Duchess class and some as City class seems pointless and confusing to me, although it's often been done, notably by Ren with their models. But not only Ren, you often hear people refer to the Duchess class or the City class, but they're all Coronation class. Anyway, when Hornby first planned a model of the Coronation class in Dublo, they chose to model the Duchess of Atholl, the second of the group of unstreamlined engines built in 1938. And Hornby made their plans just after the real loco had gone into service in 1938, but the outbreak of war in 1939 intervened. The Meccano factory in Liverpool switched to war work, and the Duchess of Atholl model didn't actually become available for sale until after Dublo production resumed in 1947. When I obtained my second Dublo Duchess of Atholl model, I renamed and renumbered it as the first of the unstreamlined batch of 1938, 6230 Duchess of Buccleuch. When I came to work with a third unstreamlined smoke deflectorless Coronation class model, I decided to rename and renumber that as the third of the 1938 summer batch, the Duchess of Montrose. Now, of course, Hornby themselves did make Dublo models of the Duchess of Montrose, but those models, released in 1953, only appeared in British Railways green livery with smoke deflectors, which had been added to the real locomotives just after the end of the war. I modelled my Dublo Duchess of Montrose as it originally went into service with the LMS in 1938, in crimson livery and without smoke deflectors, by simply renaming and renumbering a Dublo Duchess of Atholl model. Hornby never made a Dublo model of the Duchess of Sutherland, the fourth of the unstreamlined locos from 1938. The first time Hornby modelled the Duchess of Sutherland was as R066 in 1977, and that model is seen here. Note that it had smoke deflectors and a double chimney. None of the locos built in the summer of 1938 had smoke deflectors fitted initially, and actually the only one that had a double chimney as originally built was the last of the group, the Duchess of Abercorn. The Duchess of Atholl was fitted with a double blast pipe and double chimney in 1940, but didn't get smoke deflectors until later. I decided just to proceed along and name the current model as the fourth of the unstreamlined Coronation class locos from 1938, the Duchess of Sutherland, so I ordered etch plates for this from Fox Transfers. Note that these are the special larger version for early Hornby models, as noted on the frame. This option is necessary to get plates that will properly fit the Dublo Duchess of Atholl models. Here's the original Duchess of Atholl plate on the right side of the body. The horrible crack is very visible here. Note also that this body is of the early type with a lug on the side where there should actually be a recess. That error was fixed fairly early in Dublo production. The first Duchess of Atholl model that I got, from which the current chassis came, also had this error in the body. Here's the loco number on the cab side. And here's the nameplate on the other side. This side does have a recess rather than a lug. And here's the number on the other side of the cab. The number of the loco was also painted on the smokebox door. This model has been modified with a lens for a headlamp. I'm not quite sure why. The EM gauge chassis it came with did have a lamp bulb, which was the only thing about that chassis that actually worked when I got it. When you applied power, the bulb did light up, although the motor didn't move at all. The body came with crew, both seated for some reason, and one of them had fallen out as I was working with it. So I stuck him back on his seat with a dab of CA glue. Here are the Fox plates I was going to use. These steel Fox plates are pretty hard to work with in my experience. Because the steel is so hard, it's difficult to detach the blades from the frames. With the brass plates, this can be done with a knife working on a hard surface, but I've never succeeded in cutting out these steel plates with any kind of knife, no matter what I do. The little number plate for the smokebox door is a bit easier, as you can get snippers onto the thin connections for that. I cut that plate out and fitted it to the smokebox door with CA glue over the original number. I thought that looked okay. Note that as well as the headlamp, this model has been fitted with a bell. Perhaps the thought was to model as for an American tour. Getting these plates out from the frame and ready to use is a devil of a job. The only way I've found to succeed with these plates in the past has been to cut apart the outer frame with a cutting disc in a rotary tool. So I went straight to that approach in this case. With the outer frame cut through on both sides, the connections to the plates at the end can be scored as best as possible with a knife and then broken off by bending back and forth with pliers. That gets one end of the frame off. Then the other end of the frame can be done the same way. Then the connections to the central sections of the frame can be scored and broken off by bending back and forth. And finally, the two plates can be separated by scoring the connection between them and bending. This does all tend to leave little ears on the plates where the connections were. I try to file these down, but it's tricky to file the hard steel without risking damaging the enamelled plates. I tried one of the plates over the original name to test the fit. It seemed pretty much spot on. I went ahead and glued that plate in place with CA glue. And then I did the other one, perhaps not exactly centred top to bottom. The Mazak rot is pretty bad on this side, but it doesn't seem that the body is going to completely crumble. I certainly hope not. Next, I tried to remove the cab side numbers using methyl hydrate on cotton buds. Generally, I've had good success with this approach for removing markings when rebadging models, and usually it's possible to remove the markings without removing the underlying paint. However, in this case, the numbers proved very obstinate, and I couldn't get them off without hard rubbing, which also took off a lot of the crimson paint underneath as well. I wiped down with water to remove any remaining methyl hydrate. And then I got out some paint to repaint the sides of the cab, which was obviously necessary. This is Model Master British Crimson with some black mixed into it to better match the Hornby LMS crimson colour, as coming on the Hornby models. I repainted both sides of the cab with this paint. The match isn't perfect, but it actually looks very close in normal light. Here's that side after the paint dried overnight. Next, I got out some transfers for the new numbers, HMRS Pressfix gold markings, as that would match the markings on the tender best. This set provides numbers in a number of sizes. The downside of this is that you don't get many of each digit in any particular size. Since I wanted to renumber this loco as 6233 on both sides of the cab, I was going to need 4 3-digits. I figured the medium-sized gold and red numbers at top right here should work. I put a piece of masking tape on the side of the cab to give me a reference line. I started with a 2, as I figured it would be best to work out from the middle. I find it really difficult to do a good job with this kind of marking. You can't really see clearly through the back of the press-fix decals enough to properly tell exactly where you're putting the digit, so the whole thing's rather like trying to herd black cats in the dark. I did my best, but I wasn't very happy with my numbering. Still, now I had the body renamed and renumbered. I fitted the body back into the chassis. This body came to me missing its original body retaining screw, and I didn't have the exact proper screw on hand. They have a flat square head that is painted black to blend in with the front of the body. Since this body came with a silver screw that rather stood out, I painted the top of that screw black to make it a little less obvious. And I got the model back onto my Hornby Dublo 3-rail tracks for some running. So now I'll finish with a bit of running video of this model. Distinctly questionable, really, whether it was really worth doing this, because what do we got? We got a body that's probably got Mazak rot, certainly has a crack in it, on a chassis that doesn't run all that well, so, you know, it's not a very high quality model, but we'll see what we can do. Whatever. Ooh. Do a little more power than that, maybe. Not a handheld controller, so I've got to keep bobbing up and down to operate the controller. I'm running it with the MRC sound and power, not so much because I wanted the sound, but more because the MRC can go a little higher in power than the Gauge Master controller, and this I just can't get this for all the servicing and remagnetizing and whatever I've done. I just can't get this chassis running well with very little power. I mean, that's only about 50, 55, 60% on the MRC, but that would probably be close to 190 anyway on the Gauge Master. At least we've got a bit more power in reserve here. So it goes fine with this controller, but not so well with the Gauge Master. Okay, well it goes, and it's sort of gone. Let's see if we can get some coaches out and see if it can manage to actually pull a train. Where are we? I apologise for the terrible camera work, but there we go. Because that's why I like to use the Gauge Master, because it's handheld. But, okay, let me see if I can hook it up to a train. Well, I've got this Duchess of Sutherland coupled up to the train with the Exley restaurant car that I just fixed up and a brake coach, but he's having trouble pulling it, because it's not the freest flowing train. I have to give him even more power. He's got about 70% power on the MRC here, so he probably wouldn't be able to do this at all on the Gauge Master. But there he goes, he is managing to pull that round. That's the Duchess of Sutherland, an Exley restaurant coach and a brake. Bit of a strange train. I guess its only purpose is dining, really. But there you go. Could be worse, I suppose. It's another Duchess that works, albeit not all that well. But, you know, there you go. The fourth Duchess, my fourth out of the 5 that were built without streamlining in 1938. the Duchess of Sutherland 6233.